And we are recording episode 978 on Wednesday, October 26th, 2022 at 4:03 p.m. Eastern Time. Dr. Keith Rose will be joining us shortly. I think he's in surgery or doing something, doing some superlative, being, special forces, and I think a father and a surgeon and an upstanding member of society who, the more I explain them, the more I realize just how short I come up. And same with you, Baz. Special forces wasn't enough. Now you rescue children. I really am in kind of the shadow of both of y'all. But Baz, for all the new listeners, please introduce yourself because I quote you all the time during this podcast now. So you're very quickly becoming part of the encyclopedia of Tommy's podcast.
Do you? Well, I hope you're quoting something out of from George Washington or Thomas Jefferson and just telling them that I said that. That would
Well,
be,
sure, yeah, no, that's what I do. Is
far more profound.
I do it through presidential, and I go through popes, and then I just change the name to Baz.
There you go. So,
Yeah.
well, it's good to be with you, Tommy. Bazzel Baz, Citadel graduate, former captain, United States Marine Corps, um, CIA Special Operations, Ground Branch Maritime, and founder of the Association for the Recovery of Children, 501c3 nonprofit organization of former intelligence, military, and law enforcement officers that are dedicated to the recovery of missing and exploited and sex trafficked American children. So that kind of sums it all up.
Well, what I want to get into, and we'll retouch on it when Dr. Rose gets here, is it's kind of two things we've talked about. It's what he said to me probably over a year ago on the phone before we did a podcast, and I think I've brought it up with you before. And it's, he said you're doing the right thing, you're covering the right topics, you're doing it fearlessly or whatever, despite censorship. But he said, understand that sacrifice is transactional, but it's not immediately transactional, meaning that sometimes you see the fruits of your labor, sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's not until long after you're gone that what you did was, it's realized that it was worth it. And he said, just understand that because you might not see the fruits of your labor. A lot of people do, a lot of people don't. And I kind of want to tie that in with what you're doing, and your lessons from, starting in Mogadishu and what's led to ARC is your thoughts on it not being transactional. And, there's an undeniable ego aspect to it. You always want to be, no one ever wants to be wrong. There's not a person alive that doesn't like being right. It's just what it is. And if you deny that, you're just lying through your teeth. If it's winning an argument or being proven right about the Earth being a globe or a sphere, everyone likes being proved right. But there is a there is a I guess that you could almost say it's the definition of faith or hope, in that you understand you might not see the fruits of your labor, but if you are rooted in God or whatever it is you believe in, that does give you the strength to move forward. And it's scary. It's guessing on a multiple choice test and hoping that you just made an educated guess, but you might not even get the test scores back. And that's terrifying. And it really is a test of, I guess, how deep seated your faith is. So I kind of want to pick your brain on that. And I know that we've covered, the conclusion that I think you and I have come to before were the two titles of our first two episodes. And it's you stand alone before God and your actions now echo through eternity. And so that might be a spoiler alert. That might just be the answer. But I did want to continue to pick your brain on it.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. Well, I think standing for truth and standing for right in the moment, whether you reap the fruits of your labor now or later, is probably the most important thing because you only get this chance in life to say and be and do what you can do while you're here. Yeah. So the question is, do you leave it up to somebody else to do whatever that right thing is? We live in a time where it's funny, intelligent people are being silenced so that stupid people won't be offended.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, a lot of people are apprehensive to stand up for the truth For a lot of us who are war fighters, and have been downrange, we don't have the luxury of compromise anymore. And so the line between right and wrong isn't blurred for us. We know exactly what is good and evil. And quite honestly, and I say this boldly, we know the difference between right and wrong. Now we live in a world where people will go, well, that might be right for you, but it might be, I might see it as a different right or a different wrong. It doesn't work that way. That's a bunch of baloney. There's a clear cut and a very defined line between what's right and wrong. It's kind of like, remember when all the rioters, BLM and Antifa were tearing all the statues down around America
Mm-hmm.
and basically trying to destroy the history of our country. What they didn't realize is that history is not theirs or anyone's to like or dislike. It's there so that we learn from it. And
Yeah.
if it offends you, then better, that's even better,
Yeah.
because then you're less likely to repeat it. And it's not theirs to erase. It belongs to all of us. But a lot of people didn't realize that. And so they didn't come out to counter it. They didn't come out to say, wait a minute, this is not just your history. It's our history, and we own as much of it as anybody else. We've lived it. Our forefathers, our ancestors lived it. So it, I wish more people had stood up. I wish there had been more opposition to people trying to destroy the history in the United States. But things like that, excuse me, Ty,
You're good.
things like that, I think are important for individuals who are listening to the podcast in America to realize that they can't just sit back and expect somebody else to do it. And, you know, we laugh. I talk, I have these discussions with my wife to make sure I'm not going to get rolled up by some 3-letter agency for speaking out of term. But if I show up in a jail cell, you'll probably be there too. So
I'll
it
be
doesn't
there
really
right
matter
with.
to me.
Oh yeah,
But
no, I'll be there with
you
you.
know, but when I'm giving my opinion or expressing truth, ground truth, I don't really care what people think. Now, people say, well, that's not good. You want people to think good of you. Let me tell you what, those people that know me and know good from evil, their ears hear the truth
Mm-hmm.
and they know it. And then when it comes to being opposed, I always laugh and I go, well, what are you going to do? Send me to Iraq, Afghanistan, Angola? Been there, done that. Like, what is it you're going to do to me?
Yeah.
You're going to take my life? Who cares? It's eternal.
Yeah.
So I think when we get our priorities straight in our life, then we like that nobody can do anything to you. That will affect you telling the truth or standing up for what's right. I think you become bolder then, to be honest with you. You know,
The and that's one thing I admire about you, and that's one thing that I'm fascinated by, is your conviction in that there is right and there is wrong, and that's something I agree with 100%. Especially being a biology major, you couldn't negotiate an answer. Well, I think the answer is 80, and it's like that's not what 40 times 2 is. You're an idiot. You failed. Like,
right?
so that was kind of a beautiful baptism by fire. I think there are some things that there's a middle ground in, but I don't think it is the morality that you speak of. I think that there are fine delineations, and I guess that would be like the lawyer in me that would go off and say, well, technically there is no best color or whatever. But for me, I always have to be careful of when I define my own absolute right and absolute wrong, because there's not been a year in my life that hasn't gone by and I look back and I kind of shake my head at who I was just 12 months ago. And I'm like, you're trying your hardest, but man, now I know this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah,
And my concern with myself is I'm always very hesitant and admittedly dancing around the center because I don't want to plant my feet somewhere that deep down I know might not be permanent. Is that something that I'm 32? Is that something that will come with time? Or is it something that it's more defined by extremes? I think the example you use is when a rapist buries the body of a girl in the woods, there's no middle ground. And I haven't had experiences with something that extreme. That is black and white. There is no argument, there's no negotiation table. There's evil and there's good. Is that something that I just maybe haven't encountered in life yet? Or do I just need to man up and plant my feet and be like, there is right and there is wrong?
Well, I think you need to man up, quit wearing girls' clothes, like, stuff like that. I'm just
Hey,
I'm
I'm
totally
I'm
kidding,
very I'm very I'm a very pretty girl, and it's 2022. You'll be arrested for hate speech if you think I'm not beautiful. But yeah,
Well, that's funny.
yeah,
That's so funny. I'll answer your question, but it just reminded me of, Kevin Sorbo. You know who he is, right? The actor. Great guy. I hear good things about him. I don't personally know him, but I did see something that, to quote him, he said, so 19-year-olds shouldn't have to pay student debt because they can't understand the student loans they sign. But 4-year-olds can change gender whenever they feel like it. Got
yeah,
it. It's like, okay, so, it's interesting. These are just some of the things that reminded me, to answer your question about, making those decisions. Are you young enough or old enough? I think what happens is, um, whatever you do in life, just don't compromise because you'll hate yourself later. Now, a lot of people say, well, I have to compromise. No, you don't. You don't have to do anything you choose not to do. Okay. Um, you cannot legislate morality. No one can do that, although they're trying really hard to do that. Just like the hate speech, you could say, well, I hate purple people. Oh my gosh, you're going to jail because you said you hated purple people. Right? I think the way to stand fast, be honest with you, is to kind of do what Jesus did when he stood before Pilate. Pilate said, so you claim to be the Son of God. And he said, you say I am, or stuff like that. Or if there's an issue that someone wants to debate and you don't, but you already know where it's going, you don't ever have to open your mouth.
mm,
You can walk away from it and
yeah,
never compromise yourself. I think what happens is a lot of people get into debates or whatever it may be, and when they're in the midst of it, they all of a sudden feel the pressure from the audience or whoever it is that's not liking them. And because they want to be liked, they compromise.
yeah,
They go, well, maybe I don't really feel that way about this issue. I can see your point. When you get to be older and you've had enough lead thrown at you downrange and you realize that your life belongs to God, you don't really give a rat's ass what people think about this sort of stuff. It's the one thing I love about old people. I mean, really old people, right?
just don't give a
That
yeah,
they don't care, you know? They're in their 90s and it's like, what are you going to do to me? I don't care. I can say what I want to say. So I think that as long as you don't compromise, and look, only you have to go to look at yourself in the mirror every morning when you get up. And hey, Keith, how are you?
Hey, good. How you doing, brother?
I'm good, man. Only you have to look at yourself in the morning, and only you have to walk away from the conversations that you have, feeling you either said and did the right thing, or you live with it. And I want to tell you something. I think a lot of it has to do with honoring our ancestors with the way we live our life. If you're a grateful American and you realize the sacrifice that our founding fathers gave for this nation, and literally they sacrificed their lives, their welfare, their planet, everything. They sacrificed everything in a very, honestly, in a very imperfect world. But if they were willing to do that so that we can be sitting here right now, then why should we not be willing to do it for generations to come?
yeah,
To set the record straight, to know what moral truth is, values, and instill that in the few that are still willing to listen.
yeah,
And that's what I think. And so we go to the fire for it, or you get crucified for it, or jailed for it, or whatever. And we'll tell you that when you depart this earth, you'll be a much braver, bigger person than most of the people that are down here compromising and worming their way out. Because in the end, they don't feel good about themselves. I'll tell you that much.
yeah.
So,
Um, well, for late introductions, Dr. Rose, this is Basil Baz. Baz, this is This is Dr. Keith Rose, who's you've both been on here before. Keith, so actually I started the podcast talking about something you said to me last year before we did our podcast on the phone, and it's something I've brought up a million times on this podcast, and it's that sacrifice isn't immediately transactional. It's that it often is transactional, but you don't always get to see it. You don't, whether it's, making a prediction about the economy or saying that the world isn't flat or, dying in a war, you don't always see Victory Day. It can often happen, but sometimes you're not here for it. And you have to really internalize that, and your ego gets a little bit of a check, and it's like, hey, you might win, but you might not get to hold up the trophy. And your ego gets bruised to that. And tying that in with Baz's experiences of, you then have to define an absolute right and an absolute wrong. And when you can kind of plant your feet in one of those, you are less concerned with whether or not the sacrifice is you know what you did. My dad could die today. He may not see me grow up. He might not see me have kids one day. He might not see whatever I become, but he doesn't care. He knows what he did. He put me through good schools. He took care of me. He raised me. You have nothing to prove to him. He doesn't give a shit. Excuse my French. So could you maybe touch on that, Dr. Rose, with your experiences on the same kind of theme that Baz and I are talking about? Is how do you come to terms with the fact that sacrifice isn't always immediately transactional? And do you truly have to dig deep and understand something so thoroughly that you don't care if you see it come to fruition or not? Because if you die in the process, you don't care. You know what you did. You know where you stand.
Sure. Like Baz was saying, if you go back to our founders, you really want to understand this nation. You really have to look back to move forward. Our founders, this nation was founded. There's only one other nation in the world that was founded like ours. And when I say founded like ours, I mean on a covenant with God. Say what you want, but this is a covenant nation. It's a nation that shouldn't be here, that was formed against all odds. And as Benjamin Franklin said, it was formed thanks to the hand of God. I mean, literally, he said we had God's providence, which means the hand of God. God smiled on this nation. You had men that weren't perfect, but they understood one thing. They understood that the sacrifices they were making were for posterity, not prosperity. I mean, George Washington could, after the war was won, he could have been king. They wanted him to be king. In fact, the King of England at that time said because he turned down being king, if he did that, he'd be the greatest man that ever lived. And our founders understood something. They understood that it wasn't about the here and now, but what we build for the future, because they all had what I think, and I came to this late in life, a kingdom mindset about God. And they all knew that they were building something that was going to be passed down to their children and their children's children. That's why you had Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, George Washington, John Henry. All these people wrote. A lot of it's in the letters they wrote. You can find some in the Federalist Papers, George Washington's final speech to the nation. But all of them talked about virtue, moral virtue. Didn't mean you were perfect, but you were a moral, virtuous people. And so where you have us falling today is you have a nation that has gotten away from its foundational roots of, one, faith in God, two, a sense of moral virtue where, Thomas de Tocqueville said it best when he wrote Democracy in America. He came to the United States after he witnessed the French Revolution. And the guy was a brilliant sociologist, historian, and he wanted to understand why, after our revolution, we didn't go around schwacking everyone's heads off and making big power grabs, but we built a nation. Because after the French Revolution, it just descended into the reign of terror. And so when he came over here, you can read his book's great. It's 2 volumes, but his conclusion, in his words, was America is great because America is good. They have morals that tell them what they can do. He said they have laws that tell them what they can do and morals that tell them what they can't. And he went on to say, if America ever ceases to become a virtuous nation, they will cease to be great.
Hmm.
And he said the power in America is in its pulpits. And he was talking about the churches. There was a great revival and awakening. And so fast forward now to what you're seeing in 2020 in the United States of America. You're seeing what the Bible talks about, what our founders talked about, and it's simply called iniquity, when you call good bad and bad good. Now, if you say, you know, I don't want to mutilate a young child before puberty, that people say that's bad. And if you say, well, I think a drag queen should come into a kindergarten class, they would say that is good. I mean, we have completely allowed the left, the progressives, that it's just evil to redefine what's going on. And when you can change the definition of something, you can change the destination of something. And that's what we've done in the United States. We have a left that has pushed lack of morals and virtue. They're normalizing things that were never normalized in this nation. They're changing the definitions, and that changes the destination of where the nation's going. And right now, it's not going in a good direction.
That'd be like redefining words would be like, yeah, you could stick to a recipe, but if you redefine salt as sugar and sugar as salt, you can say, no, I used sugar, but don't be surprised when your brownies taste like shit. Like it's because there's a pound of salt in it. It's
Yeah, well, more to your point, we're all a design. We've all were designed by God. We just call him the designer. And when we stay in our design, we have a purpose. We understand sacrifice. We can be more successful because we're moving in our design. But when you get out of your design, you kind of get out of your mind. So you have people that are saying instead of two genders, there's 57 genders. And you have people saying girls are boys and boys are girls, and you're seeing a lot of chaos. It's and really, I was talking to a guy about this the other day. I just told him you're out of your design. And he said, what do you mean? And I go, well, you have a car? He said, yeah. I go, what does it run on? He says, unleaded. I said, great. I said, what happens if you put diesel in it? He says it doesn't run. I go, right, it's not his design. And so what we have is the United States was a designed country for virtuous and moral people. And as de Tocqueville said, is wholly unsuitable as a representative republic for anything else.
Yeah,
Baz.
that's interesting, Keith, that what you're saying. And the sad part about that is, if I may, is that we have so many people that think there's something better out there. So they're willing to sacrifice and destroy what they have right now, mostly, and very much like you said, Keith, they're not studying before to know how to go forward. They're not studying our history to understand that. So they are easily taken into socialism, communism, liberalism, whatever it may be, thinking that there's something different and better. And quite honestly, for we who are here, and for many people in the United States that have studied the governments and the nations around the world historically, there's nothing better. There has never been anything better. We know that, so, very much so what you're saying is so true. Sadly, our government, which obviously we vote people, elect people to serve us, has forgotten all of that. They've forgotten their allegiance to God, as you alluded to. Quite honestly, and I'd have to find the scripture for it, but I would like to find something that basically says they're a bunch of cowards. you know, um, they've raised the cost of living so high that both parents are always at work rather than spending time with their children. I mean, single parenthood is tough. They took God out of the schools. Parents were told, you can't discipline your kids. And now we have kids that are rude and out of control. And I think if we're not careful, we'll reap what we've sown. We've taken a whole generation and turned them into selfish, entitled brats with no respect for people, or property, or authority, and certainly no respect for God. We deem people with terminal illnesses and some with only a few months to live fit for work, and yet we allow our veterans of war to go homeless, and again, but refuse, to, I don't know, feed the hungry and the millions, and yet we give millions of foreign aid. when these people are all suffering. We save drug addicts over and over and again, but we refuse to give free diabetic supplies to those who need it in our country to stay alive. And when we bend over backwards to be politically correct, they're actually too scared to say enough is enough because they're afraid they're going to offend somebody. And I don't know. When I look at the scriptures, God wasn't afraid to offend anybody, to be honest with you.
Yeah, Christ said, he goes, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And he was
Right.
talking about truth. Hey, when he kicked the money changers out of the temple, and people go, well, gosh, why did he do that? Well, to me, in that moment, when he kicked the money changers, he was being very humble, because true humility means it takes courage when you're humble, because you have to step into your purpose. His purpose was to kick those guys out. They were in his father's house. And in the absence of truth, in the absence of courage, truth's an orphan, because you don't have men stepping up with courage. You have what you say, cowards. You have people that would choose their prosperity in the immediate over their children's posterity in the future. And so they're out of their design. They're doing all these evil things. The Bible speaks to this directly. Elisha, at the end of the Old Testament, he's flummoxed. He's like, God, everyone's turned away. What's going on? And the Lord said, there's still 7,000 that haven't bent the knee. And that's the remnant. And I believe we have a remnant here. But, the last word in the Old Testament is curse. He says, if they don't change, I will bring on a curse. So the New Testament starts out with John the Baptist coming, preaching and it said he was preaching and eating the locusts. And the locusts represented curse in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, it represented the culture. So he was literally eating the culture that had gone so wrong, because he was going to turn the hearts of fathers back to sons and sons back to father. So the basic thing to get our nation back is family. And I think that's why it's under attack. That's why children are under attack. You said it, single moms. Our whole system is designed to separate the father from the family, to emasculate men, to tell people that, rely on government, not God. Don't rely on family, when the kingdom of God is family. And so I think that I do believe this nation can have an awakening. I believe we're kind of under a curse right now, but I don't think that it's irrevocable. But it's going to take what the Bible says is hitting our knees and turning back, and men with courage, men that are willing to speak out and don't have fear. I learned at 45, if you don't fear God, you fear everything.
Yeah.
But if you do fear God, you fear nothing else.
Yeah.
And
that's so true.
And I'll take the second part every time, and doesn't matter when your life God shows up, because I was the biggest dumpster fire on the planet. And it just, I think that if we have people, and I do believe they're out there, that are willing to take a stand. And I'll tell you what, I think the biggest failures in this nation has been big evangelical churches. They become woke, and they stopped calling sin by its first name and just started teaching principles, not the person. And, so we have a generation of kids growing up going, that doesn't really do it for me in church. I hear them saying one thing, and then they're trying to compromise, when, the churches that I see doing good are the churches like the Jack Hibbs, the Rob McCoys of this world, that stand up and say, this is truth, and I'm going to say it. And we're not going to close, and we're going to do what's right. And I think when more men do that, you're going to see the hand of God again. And that'd be kind of cool.
Whatever happened to that big men's movement? Remember Keith and Tommy?
Promise Keepers.
Remember it? Promise Keepers. Whatever happened to Promise Keepers?
It was a good movement. It just, at the time, I think we went through a period. I think this was in the 90s, early 2000s. We had great prosperity, and a lot of people were like, "Yeah, it's important," but we got comfortable in our churches. I wasn't walking with the Lord then, so I was comfortable in a bar. But I think what people were getting comfortable in churches. I think pastors started preaching to an audience where they needed, bright lights, skinny jeans, and smoke machines, and keep people coming back and
Yeah.
preach to that audience. And God doesn't call the church to an audience. The church needs to be an army
Yeah.
of truth, an army. If the evangelical Christians in the United States of America voted their faith, we wouldn't be where we are now. Full stop.
Mm.
If they got out
Yeah.
and said right's right and wrong's wrong, but you can't kill 62 million babies and think you're going to have God's favor. You can't start calling good bad and bad good and think that God's going to look away. And I'm glad that we turned back Roe versus Wade, because if you look at it, God deals with individual sin differently than he dealt with national sin, like a nation sin. Like when a king sinned, he dealt with the nation. And we're a representative republic. So we elect these people. And if we elect these people, then we're responsible for their actions. And I think a lot of us got real comfortable. I was overseas for 15 years, so I didn't get a whole lot of the voting process, but a lot of people got comfortable, and they got comfortable in their prosperity, and they stopped thinking about the future. And, devil never sleeps. And the Democrats, they planned it out. They had a plan, and they worked the plan, and they'll never be satisfied. It'll always be something else. Once you had gay marriage, they're like, okay, that's it. No, now they want to indoctrinate your kids. They want to,
Right.
they want to tell them what pronouns to use and things like that. I read the Bible. My favorite pronouns are I am. That's what God said. I can't get past those pronouns. Okay.
That's
He is. I mean,
I
that's it.
slash
He
am. Yeah.
wins. When your card says I am, you win the coin contest. If he puts the I am coin on the bar, I'm buying the drinks. So, I mean, I think that this nation I think we still have a remnant. I think that the fabric of this nation is not made to bend the knee. And I think people are starting to become activated, but we got an uphill battle. And don't kid yourself, it's going to be a war. I just pray the churches get involved and start talking to people.
I think.
Yeah, it could be a war on many different levels. Tommy and I talked about that once before, what we thought that might look like. And I tell a lot of people, you won't have to worry about it. It'll end up on your doorstep. I mean, I've spent a lot of time downrange, and you don't have to go seeking out the enemy. They'll come find you. It's funny you mentioned it about the pronouns. I was on the phone with the VA today. I had to laugh about this, and the lady on the other end said, she goes, I hate to have to ask this, but now we're required at the VA. She goes, how do you identify?
Oh God.
And I went, excuse me. And then I caught it. I remember what she was talking about. And I almost said, well, I identify as a cow. How's that? Does that work for you? And I didn't. I was respectful. And she goes, are you homosexual? Are you heterosexual? Are you? And she went down a whole list. And so I thought at the end of it, and I just saw her, I said, I'm about as straight as it gets. I said, and I said, and I told her on the phone, I said, you mean it's come to this, that even in the VA, you guys have succumbed to this type of nonsense, and she laughed. She just laughed. She goes, unfortunately, yes. So Keith, you're right to some extent. And Tommy's talked about this. It has infiltrated the ranks of everything, even the churches. It has infiltrated the ranks of the churches as well. But my dad taught me, he said, one man or one woman with courage is a majority. And people need to understand that and stand up for what is right. I agree with you. Probably the best pronoun to have is I am, and at the end of the days, God doesn't need people's belief or disbelief in order to exist. And they think he does, but he doesn't. And they're going
No.
to stand before him. Call him what you want. Take a look in the universe and see how big he is. What we do, we will account for on this earth. And even the people, and I've had these discussions with people to the far left, liberal, whatever you want to call them. And even they know what they are doing. Believe it or not, and this is what's interesting. They know what they're doing is wrong, and yet they continue to do it. That's what's so funny about it. Because in the middle of a conversation, you eventually corner them, like when I deal with the LGBT and drag queen story hour, right? I'm right in the middle of that here in our town. I just wrote a big article for the newspaper opposing it. But when you really get down to brainwashing, call it influence, indoctrination, call it whatever you want. The process is the same thing we did in the CIA. There's not many people on this earth that know more about recruiting than we who came out of the agency. How to get somebody to do what you want them to do when you want them to do it for national security. Well, that's all a drag queen story hour is. It's recruiting your children so that some drag queen can tell them who they are. It's the LGP supporting that so they can change the identity of a child and make them so confused that as that child never has an opportunity to discover who they are in God ever, because God's not a part of this equation in any of that. I don't think there's any drag queen story hour that's preaching the Bible, to be honest with you. I've yet to see that.
Yeah, and to your point, Satan does have to use new tricks because the old ones work so well. And what the left does is what happened to Eve in the garden. The first thing Satan got Eve to do was to doubt God is good. If he's God's so good, why is he not letting you eat from that tree? And then he got her to envy and covet and say, well, if you eat from that tree, you'll be just like God. I mean, she could have eaten from anything else. She was married to the perfect guy. Think about this. Adam is the only perfect husband. He's made by God. He was the only perfect husband at the time. Never been one since. And when she ate from that tree, it says, immediately she was afraid. She was aware because she went to her mind, to the knowledge of good and bad. And so what the left wants and what people without God want is they want you to be your own God. Look at Yuval Harari, anyone like that. They want you to decide. We decide what's good and bad. There is no, what your truth is what you say it is. That's the way the left would say. That's just a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah. And when God kicked him out of the garden, he put an angel with a sword there, a flaming sword. The sword represents truth, sword of the spirit. And you can't get back in the garden without truth. And it's not your truth, but it's actual truth. The Greek word for truth is aletheia, or I believe it's a Hebrew word for truth is aletheia, which translates to reality. And we don't have truth here in the United States. We have people redefining. Again, remember, if I can get you to the wrong definition, I can take you to the wrong destination. When I was recruiting people all the time, I would feed their dreams and starve their fears. And what you have right now is you have people recruit. You have a bunch of really low-level access agents in all the schools, and they are attacking kids at their identity. I mean, when my kids were younger, one of them wanted to be Thomas the Train. I mean, literally at that age, at 4 or 5, he thought he was Thomas the Train, which kids will see something and want to be it. Some want to be Pokemon, some want to be Superman, whatever. And so what they're doing now is child abuse. The difference is 30 years ago, we would put these people in prison and put a sign in their front yard. And today we're not standing on truth. And so we have to, as a nation, rise up and stand on truth.
Yeah. When I was a kid, yeah. And I love Thomas the Tank Engine. All I did was build Legos. But if I ever said I wanted to be a Lego, I think my parents would have smiled and said, that's cute. And if I kept going in that direction, I think my dad would have smacked me. But I want to go back to what you said about earlier about, fearing God. If you fear God, you fear nothing. If you don't fear God, you fear everything. And it does make me think of my dad paid for my first 2 years of college when I was at Valdosta State University in Southern Georgia. And I was a fraternity. I was a pledge for a fraternity my first semester, so fall 2009. And to me, I always look back at that as like almost like a life within a life. I was away from my parents, away from, it's the first time you move out. There's hot girls all around. You can drink alcohol. You have classes. Teachers don't care if you come to class. It's up to you to be responsible. It's this whole crash course in kind of being an adult. And I laugh now. I was 19 at the time. But there's this fraternity, right? And the brothers are hazing you and guys are dropping out left and right. You start with 50, you drop to 40, 30, 20, 15, and you keep going forward. And I wanted to do it, and I did eventually finish. But I remember, as scary as it was to be hazed, and they'd beat the shit out of us, or make you eat the most disgusting stuff, or just do embarrassing stuff, and you're always sleep deprived, and all the other friends are partying, and you're like, what am I doing? And there was a sacrifice. I do think it's a good thing. But I remember my friends would always ask me like, how do you have the balls to tell them like, hey, I'm leaving to go study? And I would always say, because I'm far more scared of my father than I am these frat guys. And, like, hey, I'll get hazed and do the whole thing and memorize the Greek, whatever, and the whatever, it's all the same. But I was like, I would come to the point where they'd be like, if you leave this house, like, you're done for. And I'll be like, that's fine. My dad's going to kill me, literally kill me. I don't mean that metaphorically. I'd be like, this man will murder me if I fall below a 3.5, because in Georgia you get the Hope scholarship no matter what if you have a 3.5 and above, which means your tuition's like 25% of what it normally is. I don't care. And oddly enough, they they'd respect it. They had nowhere to go because I'd go get an A and come back. So there is that. And then I look at now, I graduated college in 2013. It's been almost 10 years. I look at my whole life from then. That is now all in the past. It's a done thing. It's just a memory. It's a fading echo. What I did was stick to my guns, get A's that eventually led to me getting into medical school. Granted, I decided not to go and I went on to do this, but I do look back at that, and as scared as I was and as subconscious as I was about what everyone else thought, I stuck to it because one, out of fear, but two, I also knew it was the right thing. And now that all of that has decayed and gone away and changed, I look at where I am now. I would be so upset if my life was on a radically different path because at 32, I was paying the debts of decisions I made when I was 19. And I try to remember that. And I go, how come this isn't another microcosm? How do I not know that this isn't a microcosm? What am I doing now?
Well, and what you say, paying the debt or paying for your decisions, fear of the Lord to me, I mean, like I was 45 when I got radically saved, literally blown up. And I realized something, when I started reading the Bible and you realize that Christ lives in you and he sits at the right hand of the God. So two people, one body. So he's looking right through your eyes, right? God's right there. You think your father's looking. My father's looking right at me. And you want to do the right thing because one thing I got when I was 45 is you may not want to pay attention to your sin, and you can pretend to ignore your sin, but you can't ignore the consequences of sin. Those two things don't coexist, as the liberals say. And we are going to be responsible someday. Like Baz said, you're going to stand before God, and it's not going to be some pseudo ethereal thing. It's going to be like we're talking right now. You're part by your body. You have a body, a soul, and a spirit. Now, body and soul, it cashed in. The spirit's going to either heaven or hell. And, I know that's binary and it's probably not cool to say, but it's the truth. And while we're down here now, though, I want to live a life that's going to please my Father in heaven. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to sit around and, just talk and pretend I'm on a cloud. No, it means I'm going to go out and do what I was designed and created to do, whether that's downrange, whether it's in the operating room, whether it's being with my wife, raising my kids, because we're a design and a design and a design. And the cool thing is when you step into your design, you don't need to take antidepressants. You don't have to go out and drink all the time. You don't have to worry about, you don't get, FOMO. And Baz can tell you our FOMO was if our brothers were downrange and we were stuck stateside. But you don't feel like you have to go out and do something to give you your identity. Christ gives you that identity. And then you're moving from a completely different place. The moment I got saved, I realized I no longer had to work for acceptance, but I worked from acceptance. Because my whole life was about performing. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know which agency I worked for because I worked for so damn many. And it was all about the next job, the next assignment. And, I remember reading in the Bible when John the Baptist baptized Jesus and he came out of the water, Jesus did, and his God in heaven looked down and said, and it says in the Bible, he said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." And Jesus hadn't done anything. Like he had done nothing in his life yet. He'd just lived, been a carpenter up until that point, hadn't spoken, hadn't done a miracle, but he was already working from acceptance. And so I think a lot of people on the left are looking for something to fill that void. And a lot of them are dealing with generational shame. That's why they want to tell us when you're white, you have white privilege, they want to shame you. Satan loves to shame people because when you shame someone, you're saying, Shame says I am something wrong. You can't change it. I can't change the fact that I'm white.
Yeah.
But God, when you do something wrong, makes you feel guilty. I felt guilty because I was. Guilt said I did something wrong. And that's why Christ died and rose again. That's the gift. So, and it says, I love this. It says Jesus despised the shame. But the liberals want to make people feel shame, because if you feel shame, you're a victim.
Yeah.
And when you become a victim, and this is the entire left playbook, it gives you the right to rebel. And so they want to create victims. They want to take your identity and give you a victim identity. They don't want you to understand family, that you have a father here, that you have parents here, that building for the future is here. They want you to think of the government's there, you're a victim, and you have a right to rebel. And then they use that. It's just like, we got people to do things we needed them to do overseas. They're getting, the left are just a bunch of, as Yuri Bezmenov used to say, they're the useful idiots.
Yeah. First
And
against the wall.
yeah. And then at the end of the day, yeah, that will be. But I still think there's enough people in this nation. There's a remnant that understand true honor, true, courage. There are a lot of warriors in this nation. And, the cool thing about being a warrior, there's strong men and weak men. And what makes a strong man is not someone that doesn't fight. They say, well, you're a good man if you don't fight. No, a strong man, a good man, has the ability to fight, but knows when to and when not to. That's what a strong, great, courageous man is. He's someone that has the absolute ability. He's trained himself his whole life to protect those around him, to protect his family, to protect his nation. But he has the discipline, and he's humble enough to know when to apply that and when not to. And a weak man is not, that doesn't make him a good man because he's weak. He doesn't have the ability to fight anyway. So what? He's not getting in a fight, but he's a soy boy and he can't fight anyway. I'm sorry. I'm not impressed with that. You're not courageous for walking away from a fight that you would never win. It's the man that could crush you like a grape that sits back and says, I'm going to let the process play out. I'm going to follow the law as long as there's righteous law.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. Kind of like another, I guess, thread on that theme, trying to use my college analogy is, I remember I was grounded in, okay, I know what I'm doing and I know who I fear and who I respect and what I have to do. And if I can do those things, I'll do the fraternity on the side. Okay. Sophomore year comes around and I lived in the frat house, but I was still studying all the time. And I was like, this is difficult because all I want to do is study. I want to be a doctor. I want to do this thing. And I also want to be involved in this. I remember one day it dawned on me that you can't have an image of how it all works out. You have to know where you stand. And then however it works out is how it works out. And I went, so if I keep studying all the time, I'm not at any of these social events. I'm not really involved with anything they do. I'm not really not for the coke and the parties till 4 a.m. That's not me. Well, then it's going to atrophy and that's going to fall away. Then it wasn't for you. And I had to, again, become confident. And eventually I transferred out of the school and just really wasn't connected to them. But I had internal friction in my mind through that because I was like, I wanted to have the cake and eat it too. And finally I realized, I was like, where do you stand? Well, I want to be a doctor. Root yourself there. The rest of your world will build around that. And that's what I had to read. I stand for free speech, but I still want to be on YouTube. Hey, man, choose your path. You can't go left and right. Okay, well, I'm going to interview these doctors because I despise censorship. Go for it. You're going to get banned. It's just like,
yeah,
you're going to get banned. But it has led to where I am now. There are many people there that have done this podcast, and they'll always say before we start recording, hey, man, I came on because I saw you got banned. It's often doctors. They're like, that's hardcore. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, I came out early in the coronavirus debacle.
Yeah.
And I called it what it was. I just, again, I'm going to speak truth, and you can't worry about where it falls. You have to, like I said, you know who you answer to. And the only reason we are where we are today is because not enough people spoke truth. Not enough elected leaders held to the fidelity of their oath to the Constitution. They basically betrayed their oath. And we, the people, are responsible to peacefully vote these chuckleheads out and put new ones in. And we have to pay attention. The brilliant view, the brilliance of our founders was they knew that they kept everything from a local bottom up, not top down government. So you really can't get top down control in this nation fully on you. That's why you want to work in your own neighborhoods, in your own cities, in your own communities. You want to write letters. You want to be involved in school boards, things like that, things that people didn't do. Get involved. I mean, that's what we're doing where I live in my county. You know, we're not going to just, you know, go quietly into the night, and we have to speak the truth. But, you know, there's a lot out there, and it's, I don't know, it may take like a miracle from God, but that's how we were founded in the first place. So I'm good with that.
Yeah. That's,
I think I am too, to be honest with you. You know, if we look at the colonies, not all the colonies were on board with moving away from the British.
no.
In fact, it was maybe 25%, and that's it. That's all. And it took an awakening. It took to the point where the tyranny was so great amongst the colonists that people were forced. I mean, when the British showed up at your house and took what you had or burned your house or killed you, whatever it may have been, then people started moving in that direction. And even then, if you were to be a gambling man, you would have said, there is absolutely no way these few can fight and win. But much to what Keith's saying, and much to what you know already, Tommy, is that I believe with all my heart, because they had written about it, it was their faith in God. It was they knew that they had God's support on all of that. It's interesting. They fought on what I call the Gideon principle. I think you know that story, right? Gideon had basically, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Keith, like 3,000, and then God cut him down to 300, you know, by taking him down to the river and having him drink. And which man would, you know, keep his sword in his hand and lap up water versus the men who just got down there like dogs to drink the water, you know, and he let all those guys go. What I learned from that is that as believers in this nation, and I also learned it from my old company in the agency, particularly Ground Branch, when you would just send a two-man team in. You didn't have 400 guys or whatever it may be, your faith in God, whatever, but the things that you could do, like, and I joke about this by like overthrowing an entire government from a hotel room with 4 guys, right? You know, something like that. But 4 guys, by the way, that loved God, just to let you know. But I believe that men of faith, the Christian faith in this nation, the faith, the Judeo-Christian faith that our country was founded on, and let no one convince you otherwise, because it is documented and it is true. I believe that when your numbers get cut down and you are the only person in your town that's speaking truth, or you're the only people, the 3 people or the only family speaking to the school board about truth, moral truth, I believe what God is saying is, I'm cutting your numbers down so that I can show up. Because God never wants us to brag about the great miracle that took place, you know, whatever it may be. I mean, I'm sure Moses stood at the Red Sea, and when he got there, he probably looked and said, seriously, God, here we're at a dead end. But God opened it up, but Moses still had to walk through. But look at the army, the size of the army that Pharaoh had, that was literally going to catch up to them and would have slaughtered every single person. And yet, God was there to help them across, to actually swallow up the Egyptians. And I believe that in our nation, excuse me, I'd agree with Keith. I think there are far greater numbers than people really understand. The media doesn't let us see the value of good, strong Christians in America. They don't want you to know that there are more of them, believe it or not, than there are of the far left, probably. There are, like, for example, the LGBT, I think it's, the gay population is like, what, 1.8% of the entire nation? But through the use of media and whatever, they have this big voice, and it makes it sound like everybody agrees with them. They're all over the place, and that's not the truth. That's not the truth, you know. In the 60s, the Satanic Church tried to do have that same strategy by introducing Satanism and other things to the nation and making it sound like they had people in every state, in every city, and whatever it may be. Excuse me. And that wasn't the truth. So, you know, much to what you said earlier, Keith, about, you know, fearing God and respecting God and taking God along with us is how we win this war, I think. You know, I believe that God honors the prayers of the few and then he blesses the
100%.
prayers of the many.
Yes. 100%.
So that one guy that's sitting in the middle of Nebraska that's on his knees every day before God, before the altar, I believe God hears his prayers. And I'll tell you something that I think is important for our nation, and it probably addresses, you know, some of that fake value that our community, our faith-based community, has acquired. I think we have a bad habit in amongst ourselves, and that is every time we go to God, we're asking God for something all the time, all the time. When do we go before God like David and Solomon and the great leaders and like Moses and just sit before God to be in his presence, to receive his spirit, the omnipotence and the power and his wisdom? And I don't think we do that like we should. Why? I'm not really sure what the answer is, other than I can imagine how God feels. You know, if I had a guy show up to my house every day and every time he showed up, he just wanted something from me versus the guy that showed up to just go for a walk with me, you know, or just want to hang out and learn who I'm about. I would like the other guy, to be honest with you, more. You know, I would value that guy a little bit more because he wants to build a relationship. And I think that I'm not so sure we're building a relationship that allows us to acquire the key to open the door to bringing fire from heaven because we don't sit in God's presence without always asking him for something. Not that God doesn't, he's our father and he gives and he helps. I get that. But I think we're just, every time we go before God, that's what we're doing. We're always asking for something.
Yeah.
I'm not
Well,
sure
I think
that's
a
right.
lot of people look at principles in churches that are teaching about sin as a principle and not a person. They're not teaching, they're teaching about all the principles of the Bible. They have regret but no repentance. And they don't want to get in front of God and just get raw. I don't I also I want to do is know Christ. And like Paul said, I want to keep my life hidden in him. And the only way I can do that is to get with him every day, is to hunger after it, is to chase after him, to see what he has for me. Because this country will be fixed when you have men that have the heart of God, and fathers will come back to sons, sons to fathers, and it's family. But you can't get that by reading principles. You get that by knowing the person who Christ is. It's not some ethereal creature. He's alive and well, and he lives inside you. So you tap into the Holy Spirit, life gets cool real quick. I mean, you'll be whatever your design is and whatever you're supposed to do. Tommy, you podcast, you did that because you you have gifts from God. Those gifts are immutable. They're not going anywhere. You're either going to have them under his glory or the world's glory. And when you tap into what God has for you and you get filled with the Holy Spirit, things can happen. And a lot of churches shied away from that because they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to offend anybody. And what I'm finding right now, my son, 6'5", 18-year-old kid, has options to do anything he wants. All he wants to do is know Christ because he had a real life experience. I just told him, get to know Christ. Ask him to reveal himself to you. He prayed for 8 months till he had a dream. And then all of a sudden, he's never the same. And it's like you said, Baz, you get in front of God. You get into his presence. And you know what I'm saying? There's no better place to be than that. There is
Yeah.
none.
Well,
And
I know when I was a little bit younger, and it's funny we're talking about this because people used to say, I used to hear preachers in tent revivals and all kinds, and they would just say, basically, you get to know Jesus, everything will work out. And I used to go, well, yeah, maybe you know Jesus, but there's a little bit of this, and you need a little bit of that, and if you do this, and you know what I've come to learn at 66, it is exactly what they said. Get a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's it, and everything else will fall in place. No different than coming home to your mom and dad. You come home after you've been out there searching the world, you're falling apart, you've done everything bad that you can think of. The world has eaten you up and spit you out 50 times, and you come home and all of a sudden everything is okay because they're going to take care of you. They're your flesh and blood. They're never going to let anything happen to you. You know, they're going to feed you, they're going to keep you warm and whole thing. And that's just because you came home. And that's exactly right, Keith. It's you just need Jesus in your life. That real
Yeah,
relationship.
not religion, just Jesus. I mean,
Yeah.
and then, then you'll start. I mean, I had been to church before. I just couldn't tell you what I heard. And, once I got filled, all of a sudden I wanted to read the Bible, and then the Bible will start talking back to you, and you'll start reading something. You go, oh, that's me, or, oh, I remember this, or I remember that time I didn't get smoked, and maybe this makes sense. I kind of identify with Paul when Paul said he was the worst of the worst. That's kind of what I was. And Tommy, you say you do what you want, you think you should do. And, God called Paul. This guy persecuted Christians. He crucified him. He's a Pharisee. And I think we have the spirit of the Pharisees right now in our nation. You have people with a lot of knowledge with no works, and their hearts are dark. And, it says when Paul was on the road to Damascus, he was struck with a great light. And that's the key. It's not logic, it's light that's going to change this nation. And then God told Ananias to go to a street called Straight at the house of Judas, where Paul was. If you don't think God has a good sense of humor, he sent Ananias to go talk to Paul on Straight Street, the most crooked guy in the world. And he says, when Paul got struck with that light, he couldn't see. He said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And I think that's what we need to do as a nation. If once you get that light, you just ask, what do you want me to do? And then be obedient to whatever God puts on your heart. You don't have to worry about, it's not about right and wrong. It's about being obedient to God, and everything else is downstream from that. Yeah. It's not about how many things I can do good or how many things I've done bad. It just means, am I true to my calling in God? And that may be as a doctor, it could be as a podcaster, it could be as a sports star, it could be as a, someone working ground branch, someone working in the, the SF community, whatever. But as long as it's your calling, you're being obedient to it, you're going to have an exciting life. Because Baz can tell you, and I can tell you, once I got to know who God was, my life's been 1,000 times more exciting. Hasn't been easy, but I never know where I'm really going. I just love the guy that's leading me there.
I've told the story before, episode 216, when I interviewed Charlie Duke, the 10th man to walk on the moon, and I was talking to him about what happens next, because if you want to be in the Air Force, what do you want to be? A fighter pilot. But what's above fighter pilot? Test pilot. You're trying to wrestle down a new technology. What's even cooler than that? Well, going into orbit. Well, what's the apex? I mean, walking on the moon. Kennedy, would do it not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Well, I remember I asked him, I was like, what did you do after walking on the moon? I mean, you're it's the apex of human achievement. He's like, well, I came back and I worked on a space shuttle, helped designing it. And he's like, but it felt colorless. I was just like, what am I doing? And he's like, I think he started working at like Anheuser-Busch or something, or Coors. And then ironically, he's like, started drinking a lot. And he's like, because I knew I was never gonna touch it again. How could it? There's nothing like sitting on top of 6 million pounds of thrust and being thrown at Mach 30 at the moon, and then walking on the moon and the president saying, good job. I mean, it's Tom Brady times a trillion. And I was like, well, what did you do? And he's like, well, I became like a bad father, became a bad husband, and became very depressed. And he was like, and I was never a religious man. And then one day he's like, I just thought, like, why don't I, as a scientist, why don't I give it a shot? Like almost like you're putting different chemicals on like a patch of skin. Where do you react? Let's just do the science. Am I allergic? Hey, look, I'm not allergic to vitamin C. Oh, I am allergic to penicillin, whatever. He's like, why don't I just try it as a scientist? Why don't I just try it as a variable? And he said all he did was ask God to come into his heart. And he said he felt foolish for even saying it. And he goes, and my life has been beautiful for 50 plus years. And his line, which I really think should be trademarked, is the only thing better than walking on the moon is walking with Christ. And at the time, when I did that interview with him, I was raised Roman Catholic, became an atheist around 16, and was pretty much atheist till around then, which was about 2 years ago. And I told him, I was like, I meditate every day and I have since 2008. And he told me, he was like, well, he's like, as a scientist, he was like, just try it. Earnestly try it. Don't roll your eyes at it, but just try it. Ask God to come. So I was like, well, I'm not going to tell this guy that walked on the moon no. And even when the podcast is over, I'm not going to go into my room and be like, all right, that guy was wild. I was like, there's got to be something for, it's almost like, as much as you rebel against your parents when you're younger, even when you're 18, every once in a while, you're still like, the old man's probably got a point. So I was like, I'll try it. Humbled me. I've said it before. I've been laughed at it for before. I don't care. My life has been indescribably, irreversibly better since I earnestly asked God to come in my heart. And people always ask, well, where's the scientific proof? You're a science mind. I don't have one, but I also don't need. If I look at you with the same firmness that I go, I guarantee you, sun's rising tomorrow. I guarantee you that. Well, the sun's racist. You can call whatever you want. You can praise the sun. You can think about crops. You can put your head in the sand. You can go crawl into a cave. You can blind yourself. I'd bet anything, sun's coming up in about 12 hours. With that same firmness, it's not even a point that I get a little nervous about. Oh, am I going to flip a coin and win? I just go, sun's coming up tomorrow. It's coming up and the next day. You can kill me. Sun's still going to come up. With that firmness, I do know it in my heart. And I don't feel any need to prove it to anyone or to explain it to anyone. There is just, and I can't put it on a spreadsheet. I can't show it to you in a beaker. With that firmness, though, I do feel grounded in reality. And doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's not scary. But man, the direction you're going in. You know what you're doing. And like Keith, like you say, you're in your design. It's all of a sudden when the gears get lined up perfectly and then the engine's just humming. And you're like, there it is. It's not grinding. It's just, and you're like, there it is. And then what do you do from there? You don't care. You're in the humming. Whatever happens, happens. You're in that sort of resonance. You don't need anywhere to go. There is no end state anymore. You're not trying to get anywhere.
And like you said, I love what the guy that walked on the moon
Charlie
said.
Duke.
And it's true. Charlie Duke. You can't, when you're with God and you keep your life hidden in him, it's easy to do things and be heroic in the mountaintops or when things are really intense.
Yeah.
Or when things are really bad, pulling yourself out. The cool thing about walking with God is you just keep your life hidden with him, even in the days that you think nothing's happening, because all your situations are engineered. He says a wise man's steps are engineered by God, and he gives you a lot of peace that passes all understanding. He doesn't say your life's going to be easy.
Nope.
In fact, you learn from the things that you go through, but I would rather go through them with Christ, because if you have your heart pure, then you know that, okay, I'm learning.
Yes.
So, God, the Bible talks about going from glory to glory to glory, and you're going to have your times in the wilderness. The difference is, I always look at people. I don't really need to hear them. I just look at their fruit. People by what they produce. We should start looking at our politicians more about what they produce and not what they say. And, as Christ followers, God says you will know them by their fruit. If you're plugged into a bad root, you're going to have bad fruit. Bad root, bad fruit. If I plug into socialism, I'm not going to produce anything. I'm going to destroy everything. And socialism and this radical leftist, none of it makes any sense unless you really understand the Bible and understand good and evil.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be any religion in the world and leftists don't care, but why do they only care if you're a Christian?
Yeah.
Because they know that you are centered and grounded in something that is the antithesis of what they're trying to produce, dependence and chaos. Because when you're a believer, you're grounded in faith, in reality. And, that's why you help people. That's why you work with people. That's why we do what we do. Just like Bazzel says, the guys that would go overseas and do the craziest stuff, and I was one of those guys. I used to do it because of my ego and my not caring. And then once I got saved, it had so much more meaning because when I went this time, I was looking for the opportunities to serve and be obedient to what God called me to. And it doesn't keep you from doing cool stuff, but you realize you have nothing to do with your success. You just get to be a witness to his strength, his power, his glory, which takes all the pressure off you.
Yeah.
All you have to do is be obedient, which
Yeah.
is also kind of cool.
It's yeah, once you realize that you're not the wave, that you're just on the surfboard on the wave, it's so much more fun. You're like, "Oh," it's like when you're on, like, a road trip and someone else takes the wheel and you get to sit in the back seat, all of a sudden you put your feet up and you're like, "Oh, yeah, there we go." And there's just that moment of like, "Oh, we're cruising now." And, kind of back to the allergy thing. Yeah, the more, vehemently and foaming at the mouth and red in the face people get at something, I tend to go, "Oh, that's where I should be." When I'm like, "I think America's great," and their eyes turn black, and I'm like, I talked to a guy that walked on the moon, and I found God through him, and my life's better." And you kinda see the foam coming, I'm like, "There we go. I'm doing the right thing. It's there's the reaction I'm looking for. I know that's where I should be."
Well, they
Um,
don't like America because they have the wrong definition of it,
yeah.
and that they're told the wrong thing.
Well, the entire thing is rooted. I mean, you can really boil it all down, and I guess we'll wrap it up on this note. Is it all comes down to, in my opinion, from what I have observed in my 32 years, it comes down to creation versus destruction. It's always easier to say what's wrong with the world and not do something to change it. I can look around and go, "This sucks," or "Oh, it sucks. I'm getting older. I'm gaining weight." Or you can go, "Well, it just means you gotta exercise harder. It means you gotta cut out alcohol. Maybe you gotta go to bed earlier. Maybe you gotta work harder." Whenever there's a problem, there's one of two ways to go about it. You can destroy it, or you can work towards something greater. And that which is creation, I believe, is more Christ-like in that you make a better thing. You make it shinier, brighter, lighter, quicker, faster, warmer, whatever. When all you have is destruction, I tend to look at that as a demonic force. And when you are rooted in self-hatred and guilt, because being guilty for being white is just as bad for making someone a
Shame.
slave.
Yeah, you're rooted in shame.
Well, it's also as illogical as making someone a slave because they're black. It's something they don't control, and it's authority you're not gifted. That's not yours to make them a slave. It is also not yours to tell someone they are less than. That is rooted in hatred. I mean, what do we call it? We literally call it cancel culture. It's exiting it out. It's getting rid of it. There's no replacement. There's never a replacement. Well, there is a replacement. It's a dystopian communist hellscape, but they don't tell you the quiet part. Versus creating, make it better, love yourself. No one ever says, "Why don't you just start loving everyone?" It's, "No, you need to hate yourself as much as they hate you." The hell? What? No, that's a race to the bottom. Root yourself in creation and making it better. The idea of just burn it all down, destroy it, it's evil. That just leads to ashes versus build something so much more incredible. And
And
that's
when you live, Tommy, what's happening in America is because man is unto himself, meaning he isn't honoring God, and therefore he thinks and says, and his actions are directed by the corruptness of his own heart. When you have a heart for God, things like racism, color, they're like invisible. I mean, after I gave my life to the Lord years ago, I literally would be in situations where people would say, "Well, what do you think? What about that guy? We can't hire him because he's from India, or he's black, or he's Chinese," and be like, "What? What?" It didn't register with me anymore. There was no prejudice. There was no hurt. All I saw him as or her was a child of God,
yeah.
and all I wanted to do was have the compassion and the caring that God had. And so, very much like Keith is turned on, where Satan wants to destroy, and a Christ-centered world, we don't have those conflicts, you know, because your obedience to God requires you as a believer to be Christ-like. And the more the Holy Spirit saturates your life, the more you miraculously become that. One day you just wake up and go, "Wow, I don't feel that way anymore about things," or I don't see
True.
it this way. Why do I want to go help the people in the hospital now when I didn't? Or why is it that I want to like go
Yeah.
feed my neighbor? I used to not like to do that. I mean, I
Yeah.
was, why am I now not so centered on me, but why am I centered and more compassionate on helping people around me in my neighborhood? And that's what Christ does. And when you have that balance, so to speak, in humanity, what you have is you have what Christ was, pure love. Pure love. You hear people using things all the time. You see them on people's when they're protesting, love this and love that. And that's not Christ's love. Trust me. That's man-driven, their idea of love. Kind of like it was in the 60s, free love. It's not that agape love that they're talking about. But when you have that God-centered love, then what happens is you change, everything about you changes, your attitude. And so you don't have those conflicts anymore. You don't look with your eyes, you look with God's eyes. And it's a nice place to be because it puts you outside of the world, being in the world, as Christ said, but not being of the world. And as much as I love where I live, you know, um, it's not all God has for me. I love what you said, Keith, and I'm going to try and remember this. And with your permission, I'm preaching at a church
Anything I say, brother, is yours.
I want to use it, but when you said, I don't always know where I'm going, but I love the guy I'm following, or I love the guy that's taking me there. And that is such an amazing statement to live by, because we don't always know where we're going all the time, but we trust and we love the guy that we're following, or the guy that's taking us there, and that's Jesus Christ. And it's a great place that's a great way to stay.
Well, I heard something similar reading Oswald Chambers, not to that exact thing, but it made sense to me. But at the end of the day, whoever's out there, that you can know that, I don't know about you guys, but I was the worst of the worst. And
I was a terrible human.
But I'm 57. I had a few more years to really perfect it, and a lot more
66,
bodies.
That must mean I'm really bad than you guys.
But the thing was, at the end of the day, once you can't earn this stuff. There's nothing I could have done to be accepted. There's nothing I could have done. I mean, I always, I always would think that I could do anything. The harder the job, the better the job. But at the end of the day, you can't be accepted. It's an exchange. God put his son down here. He died, he rose again. And he was the plea bargain, because God the Father's a judge and God the Father is a father. God's a father and a judge. And there's a justice system. It says earth was made similar to heaven, and there's a justice system in heaven, and the judge has to have justice, and the Father wanted mercy. So he sent his son. His son was perfect. He died. And what struck me was, when you look at that picture where you see 3 crosses, and the one in the center, God was killed with 2 criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And it struck me that I was a spiritual criminal, man. I was the worst. I mean, I knew better. My father and mother taught me all this. I rejected it.
Yeah.
And I knew better. And I was a spiritual criminal. And then I realized he took my place. He made the exchange. All I had to do was accept the exchange, the plea bargain. And then at that point, the judge got justice, but the Father got mercy, was able to give mercy. And I think when people understand that, the left doesn't want people to understand they don't have to live in their shame. That exchange is immediate. And then I love what Baz said. He was basically describing beholding and becoming. We're constantly beholding and becoming. In your walk, God will start revealing more and more stuff to you. You'll behold something, you'll become something else. It's the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. And so you start reading all this stuff, and you start and I'm a scientist. I've published papers. I'm a pilot. I've done things. And all that doesn't mean anything, because you take that logic out of your head and go to the light. Yeah. That's what you did. And you went to light. And when you go to light, that's what's going to save this nation. Light, not logic. But on the other side of that light is a lot of good things. That's why we've been so successful as a nation. Free people are the ones that can innovate and grow. Evil doesn't create anything. Evil's not creative. It does nothing to create anything. It just causes chaos and destruction. And you can look back and see that. But when you have people that are free, and I'm talking about free in Christ, because with Christ in me, I'm free. You put me in jail, I'm still free.
Yeah.
I know where I am. I know who I am. You can't take the freedom I have in Christ. And, I think when people start to understand that, you'll start to see a shift in this nation. You'll see more people hit their knees, and you'll see us not only turn back, but really move forward as a nation. There's more things to discover. You can't think about things that are outside of logic unless you have the light inside of you that makes you know there's more out there than you can understand and realize.
I think you both kind of hit on something that I haven't really been able to put into words, and it's that I have yet to be I have yet to be I don't know why I can't put this into words. I've never ceased to be amazed at just how much more is being revealed to me. Like it was just a little over 2 months ago, I kind of had a revelation that I had to cut alcohol out of my life. And I was like, well, my weekends are going to be a lot more boring. But I was okay. I finally was okay with it. I was like, but I've been having panic attacks and this needs to stop. The number of other doors that have opened just from trying to be, really even just from doing something simple like just a homeless shelter and just bringing bath towels there, and the feeling that creates, and then the thoughts that those feelings create, and then the old people that I've reconnected with, that the grudges I've settled, the different things to a level where I'm like, it almost does feel like the butterfly effect. Don't kill that butterfly, because then JFK will get shot a year earlier, a million years later. You're like, what the hell? But it does play out just in 2 months, not even the whole 2 years of asking God to come into my heart. The number of things that just keep, that I wasn't even expecting this. I was okay with it being boring, but just doing the right thing. No, it's just turned into this blissful. I just feel like I'm on a walk in the park, and every corner I turn, there's a bigger tree and a stronger river and a more wildly beautiful animal and a brighter sun. And you're just, every day you're like, fuck, this is wild. And then you take another turn around another hill, you're like, look at that. And then you just keep walking, and then you never think it can surpass it. And then the next day you're like, you thought that was crazy. Look at, and it's just more and more beautiful. And you really don't feel desire to even, you have no obligation to explain it to anyone. You're like, you're like, this is heaven. I don't care if you're coming, as you said, dude, I know who I'm following. You're like, more, and in less formal terms, you're like, this is dope. I'm gonna keep doing this.
Well,
This is the
think
coolest
about
thing ever.
this, Tommy. Every other religion in the world, people are trying to get to heaven or get to where they want to go. Christianity is the only religion, the true religion, where God came to earth. He came to us. That's how we got to him. He came to us. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to, if you're Muslim, you have to check a lot of boxes. They don't really even get to know. It's all weighted scale at the end of the day. It's the only religion in the world where all you have to do is accept the exchange, and God comes straight to you. And it's immutable. And then he'll start revealing things to you, like you're finding out as you grow, and start digging into your Bible, and I guarantee you, it'll blow your mind.
It's a beauty.
Read the story Gideon. That's one of the most powerful ones. And you said Moses. Think about Moses. He split the Red Seas with his staff, but God called Moses when he was 80 years old in the desert. He didn't have anything. God said, look down, what's that? It's my staff. He used what he had in his hand. God gives us all something in our hand to use. It wasn't the staff. That was what he had in his hand. It was the power behind the staff. It's the same thing in Genesis when it says, when God made man, he put his breath into him. He didn't put his breath into the animals. He put it into man. That's the Holy Spirit. God breathed on our Constitution. God breathed on our founders. We had the breath of God when we founded this nation. And it's only the breath of God that's going to keep this nation.
Amen.
Amen. Gentlemen, Dr. Keith Rose. I think we'll just make Baz an honorary doctor. Not that I have that authority, but Dr. Baz.
No, Baz was GB. That's even cooler.
Yeah, Baz was the as I had on a guy from Air Branch last week, And I was like, that's like the tip of the spear. He goes, we always joked in the special activities division that the tip of the spear is a couple 100 feet behind us. And I was like, that's a badass line. And yeah, that's
That's funny. I've had that thing. Guys are going, "Oh, you were part of the tip of the spear," and I look at him and go, "If you saw how blunted my spear tip was, you would know I was probably not that effective."
Yeah, if people understood how easy it was to do things that Hollywood makes look hard, it would blow your mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Wow.
Take a bus instead of jump out of a plane. Works the same.
Yeah, that's right. It is. I
I've
will tell
heard.
you,
I
it
don't
is
know.
only.
I've
It
heard
is
about
only by
that.
God's grace.
Very much so.
It's
Yeah.
brilliant. Well, I think that's a segue into another episode. Is we'll pick up on that thought. But guys, go I'll put in Baz's website for ARC, the Association for the Recovery of Children. Also put in the link to your podcast, Dr. Rose, The Scalpel, correct?
That's correct.
I'll
The
put it in
Scalpel.
there. I will love to have you both on again. That was awesome. That was everything I thought it would be. I'm glad it came together. And I'll send you guys the episode when it's up. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
Thanks,
brother.
guys. Keith, God bless you guys. See you later.
Hey, God bless, Baz. Quick
God bless
question:
everybody.
when you
Stay